It's another episode of Off the Mic. I'm Matt Salmon, along with Senior Deportes Raul Sainz, here to talk a little bit more about the World Cup. Again, every World Cup game will be in English on ESPN Deportes 1510. You can hear the American games and some of the playoff games on 540 ESPN. Don't forget Soccer Saturday, every Saturday at 8 a.m., presented by the Milwaukee Wave on 540 ESPN, ESPNMilwaukee.com. And Raul, you're talking about the World Cup after every day, about 3:30 in the afternoon, right?
Monday through Friday, we have the show in Spanish, Charla Mundialista, on ESPN Deportes 1510, where we're kind of pretty much recapping all of the day's action, and we let the fans here be able to talk and give their opinions on that day's matches.
Well, a lot of stuff to recap just the first round of games. Maria, our intern, will be reading the questions. Go ahead.
Sure. Matt Raul, what's your prediction for the U.S.-Slovenia match?
Well, it's going to be an interesting matchup, and the group's kind of been changed around a little bit considering that Slovenia won its first matchup. I still think the United States is the favorite. I think they're going to win, and it's going to be important for them to break through that Slovenia defense. I see Slovenia really packing a lot of guys behind the ball. Their defense excelled through European qualifying and did well against Algeria. I still think the United States is going to win, but it might only be 2-1.
They should win. They definitely should win. I'm interested to see how the U.S. is going to react entering the contest as the favorite. I want to see more from Josie Altidore. I want to see more from Landon Donovan. He really wasn't that much of a factor in the England game. But I agree with you. I think the U.S. will probably win that matchup, and I actually think they'll win 2-0.
So is the U.S. your most impressive team? And if not, who is through the first round of games?
I think Germany's been the most impressive. There were a lot of questions about Germany coming into this tournament. They lost a lot of their experience, like Michael Ballack was out, but some of the young players have done a nice job stepping in. Again, there's no Oliver Kahn either in goal, and yet the German defense still looks very good. They scored 4 goals against a weaker Australia team, but we're seeing the top name offensive players like Lucas Podolski, Miroslav Klose get on the score sheet, and Özil, their midfielder, has been very impressive so far.
I would agree with you about Germany, but I also have to mention Chile. Chile was also very impressive because the fact that they were losing one of their top scorers in Humberto Suazo, they looked very, very dynamic, and I think they have a chance to actually make some noise, especially now that Spain lost in their first matchup.
I would agree. I think Chile is in the driver's seat for Group H so far.
Are there any other storylines that have caught your attention?
I'm kind of pulling for New Zealand. I'm going to admit, just because they're the tiny country. It's only their second World Cup. Their last one was in 1982, and they just got destroyed then. They had a nice draw against Slovakia. Now, they're at the top, actually, of Group F. Italy's in that same group, and then you have Slovakia, and you also have Paraguay. So, I mean, the planets still have to align for New Zealand to make it into the round of 16, but for the first time, they can say after one game, they're at the top of their group, and they're still going to have to fight hard. They'll probably just get destroyed on the 20th against Italy, but I'm pulling for New Zealand.
I have to say Spain. I mean, who would have thought that Spain would have lost in their first matchup against a team who they've never lost to in 18 matches? I mean, Switzerland decided to beat Spain for the first time in the biggest stage ever, the World Cup. So I want to see how they're going to bounce back, especially since they were considered the big favorite to win the whole thing.
So have any of your tournament predictions changed then?
Not necessarily. I still think Spain can bounce back. What's going to be interesting is that they might end up being second place in their group, and then they might end up having to face Brazil in the beginning of the second round, which when we both expected them to be facing off in the finals. So that might be the only change right there. I still think it would be the winner of that matchup, either Spain or Brazil, being able to, in the end, being able to win the whole tournament.
No team has ever won the World Cup after losing their first match of pool play. One team did make it to the finals. That was Argentina in 1990, but they lost in 90 in the finals. I may have to hedge the bet a little bit. I'm still wondering what's going to happen in Group G, the group that Brazil is in. There's a big game coming up, Brazil against the Ivory Coast. That's coming up on Sunday. I would expect Didier Drogba to play a full match. Now, we saw North Korea fight and scratch and claw, and they came away 2-1 losers, but they were able to hold Brazil at bay for the first half, and then Brazil kind of came forward a little bit and scored a couple of goals.
I think they were just feeding things out, man. I think they kind of turned it up a notch in the second half.
That could be true, but one thing you do have to say is Ivory Coast is far more offensive weapons against a Brazil team that is trying to go a little bit more defensive. I still would expect Brazil to win the game, but one thing that North Korea did show me is that this Brazil team may not have the complete offense that it had in years before, playing with one striker like Luis Fabiano, and then you have Kaká, who's really meant to pull all the strings.
Honestly, I got to tell you something about Brazil. I think they miss Ronaldinho. As much as Dunga didn't want to take him to the World Cup, and he was kind of stubborn about not taking him, I think they really missed out on his play.
And it is interesting talking about Brazil, where you're missing some of the big-name players like Ronaldinho, or some of the big-name players that have fallen off like Adriano, who's had his own personal problems. And you're looking at this midfield, and it doesn't scream out with big name players that they've had in the
Right.
past. You know, obviously Kaká's there, but there's no Ronaldinho. There's no Juninho, who was one of the better players in Brazil. There's no Emerson in years past. Emerson was one of those players that really held the midfield together. And as a striker, you have Luis Fabiano, who's nice. I know they have Robinho. Robinho's kind of temperamental. He had a nice assist to
Right.
Eliano, but this Brazil team, while it is more defensive, it doesn't scream to me that it has that kind of team that can score 5 goals in a game.
I think it's the kind of team that's just going to slowly but surely try to rise up to that level. Kaká lifted out to be the center in that first matchup. I think he could have done a little bit more, but I was actually impressed with Robinho. I think he did pretty well doing in the playmaker role, as well as Maicon. Maicon is actually pretty good as well. So I think that Brazilian team is only going to get better as they play more matches.
And one last question for you, gentlemen. Will the U.S. make it out of their group?
I still think they will make it out of the group. Again, the group's a little bit turned upside down right now with Slovenia leading, but we'll see. England still has to play Slovenia as well.
Right.
And the United States, I think, is going to be helped by having Algeria as their final game in the group. That should be something where, you know, nothing should be taken for granted, but that should be an easy win to push them through. So as long as they get a draw against Slovenia, they should still be able to advance.
Yeah, I totally believe that the U.S. has everything to be able to advance to the next round. And at this point, I mean, it's still open. They could win the group or they could come out at second place, but they do have what it takes to be able to advance to the next round of matches.
Thanks for joining us for another installment of Off the Mic. Raul and I will be back again sometime soon to break down the World Cup since now. And don't forget, you can check out every game in English on ESPN Deportes 1510.